Montana Territory, 1875. The Montana winter had come early that year, blanketing the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains in a pristine white that seemed to stretch into forever. Samuel Zane pulled his coat tighter around his lean frame as he guided his horse through the snow-covered valley. At 25, he had already lived more life than most men twice his age, the harsh realities of the frontier etched into his otherwise youthful features. His face was clean-shaven, with a strong jaw that spoke of determination, though the weariness in his deep blue eyes revealed wounds that ran deeper than any physical scar. Samuel had learned one truth above all others during his years working cattle: attachment was a luxury a man couldn't afford on the frontier. Love was a distraction that got people killed. The West demanded everything from a man: his strength, his focus, his complete dedication to survival. There was no room for the vulnerability that came with letting someone else matter too much. "Just you and me, Thunder," he murmured to his black stallion, patting the animal's muscular neck as they crested a ridge overlooking Whitefish Creek. The small settlement below was barely visible through the swirling snow, just a collection of wooden structures huddled against the wilderness, smoke rising from chimneys in defiant wisps against the gray sky. Samuel hadn't planned to stop in Whitefish Creek. His destination was the Crowley Ranch 30 miles north, where winter work awaited him, but the storm was worsening, and even his stubborn nature recognized the foolishness of continuing. One night in town, then he would be gone before dawn, returning to the solitary life he had built for himself. It was safer that way, cleaner. The Double Eagle Saloon was the only establishment showing signs of life as Samuel rode into town. He stabled Thunder, ensuring the horse had ample feed and a warm stall, before trudging through deepening snow toward the amber glow of the saloon windows. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, the sudden warmth hit him like a physical force, along with the familiar medley of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies that defined such places across the frontier. Samuel claimed a small table in the corner, ordered whiskey, and settled in to wait out the worst of the storm. He kept his hat low, discouraging conversation. The last thing he needed was entanglement with local troubles. His solitude was short-lived. The saloon door flew open with a blast of frigid air, and a flurry of snow swirled in around a slight figure wrapped in a travel-worn cloak. The newcomer stumbled forward, collapsing against the nearest table before sliding to the floor. For one long moment, nobody moved. Then Samuel was on his feet, crossing the room before he'd made any conscious decision to do so. Something in the desperation of that entrance had bypassed his carefully constructed walls. Kneeling beside the fallen figure, he gently turned them over. The hood fell back, revealing a young woman's face, pale as the snow outside, her chestnut hair tumbling in damp waves around delicate features. Her eyes fluttered open, startling green like spring leaves, and locked onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Help me," she whispered, fingers clutching weakly at his coat sleeve. "Please." Something shifted in Samuel's chest, a fault line cracking in the bedrock of his solitude. Her name was Madeline Drake. She was 22 years old, traveling west to join her uncle after the death of her parents in Baltimore. The stagecoach had been forced to stop 10 miles out of town when a wheel broke, and rather than wait with the driver for help, she had attempted to walk to Whitefish Creek, a decision that nearly killed her. Samuel found himself installing the half-frozen woman in the town's only boarding house, paying for a room and sending for the local doctor before he could question his actions. The doctor, a gruff older man with capable hands, pronounced her suffering from exposure but likely to recover with proper rest and warmth. "She's lucky you brought her in when you did," the doctor said, packing away his instruments. "Another hour out there, different story entirely." Samuel nodded, uncomfortable with the implication that he had saved her life. He had only done what any decent man would do. Tomorrow, once he was certain she would recover, he would continue north. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more, yet as he turned to leave her room, her voice stopped him, still weak but with steel underneath. "Mr. Zane," Madeline said, her green eyes fever-bright in her pale face. She whispered, "I was not meant to make it to Christmas," and the cowboy lifted her up. Samuel frowned, turning back. "I don't understand." A small, delirious smile touched her lips. "My mother, before she died, she had the sight sometimes. She told me a cowboy would save me from the snow, that I wouldn't make it to Christmas without him." Her eyes drifted closed. I didn't believe her. Something cold that had nothing to do with the winter outside settled in Samuel's stomach. He had no patience for fortune-telling and premonitions. The frontier was harsh enough without adding superstition to its dangers. "Rest, Miss Drake," he said stiffly. "You need your strength." He left quickly, disturbed by both her words and his own uncharacteristic involvement. One night, he reminded himself. In the morning, he would ride north, leaving Whitefish Creek and its mysterious young woman behind. But when morning came, the storm had not abated. If anything, it had strengthened, with snow piling against building walls and wind howling down the street like a living thing. No sane man would attempt the journey to Crowley Ranch in such conditions. Samuel found himself returning to the boarding house, telling himself he was merely being practical. If he was delayed a few days, he might as well check on the woman whose life he had saved. It was simple human decency, nothing more. He found Madeline sitting up in bed, color returned to her cheeks, her chestnut hair neatly braided over one shoulder. She wore a simple blue dress the landlady had loaned her, modest but flattering to her slender frame. The transformation from the half-dead woman he had carried from the saloon was remarkable. "Mr. Zane," she said, smiling as he hesitantly entered the room. "I hoped you would come. I wanted to thank you properly." "No need for thanks," Samuel said awkwardly, remaining near the door. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't." "You did." Her directness was unsettling. Eastern women, in his limited experience, were rarely so forthright. "The doctor says I would have died without your intervention." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. The storms worsened. "I'll be delayed in town a few days." "A fortunate coincidence," Madeline said, that same mysterious smile touching her lips. "I find myself stranded as well, with no belongings and no way to reach my uncle's homestead." "Your uncle?" Samuel seized on the change of subject. "Where exactly is his place?" "North of here, 40 miles or so, near Wolf Creek." She hesitated. "At least, that's where he was when he last wrote. It's been nearly 6 months." Samuel frowned. Wolf Creek was only 10 miles from the Crowley Ranch, another coincidence he didn't care for. "I could escort you there," he heard himself say, immediately regretting the offer, "once the weather clears." "It's on my way." The smile she gave him was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden, transformative, impossible to look away from. "That would be a tremendous kindness, Mr. Zane." "Samuel," he corrected, then wondered why he had done so. He never invited such familiarity from strangers. "Samuel," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name made that fault line in his chest widen further. "Then you must call me Madeline." 3 days passed before the storm released its grip on Whitefish Creek. 3 days in which Samuel found himself drawn repeatedly to Madeline's company, telling himself it was merely to finalize their travel plans. He learned she was educated, with a quick mind that challenged his own. She had worked as a schoolteacher in Baltimore before her parents' deaths from influenza had left her alone in the world. Her uncle, Henry Drake, was her only living relative, a former army surgeon who had moved west after the war, seeking peace in the wilderness. "He wrote that there was healing in these mountains," Madeline said as they shared dinner in the boarding house's small dining room. After everything he saw during the war, he needed that. Samuel nodded. He understood the impulse, though his own demons had different origins. "The mountains don't ask questions or expect answers," he said. "They just are. Is that why you're here, seeking something that just is?" Her perception was unnerving. Samuel changed the subject, discussing practical matters of their upcoming journey instead. Yet later, alone in his room, her question lingered. Was that what he had been doing these past years, drifting from ranch to ranch, avoiding connection, seeking something solid and unchanging in a world that had proven itself fundamentally unreliable? The morning they were to depart dawned clear and cold, the sky an impossible blue above the snow-covered landscape. Samuel had procured a horse for Madeline, a gentle mare named Daisy, and loaded their limited supplies on his own mount. The journey to Wolf Creek would take at least 2 days, with an overnight camp necessary. As they rode out of town, Samuel couldn't help noticing how naturally Madeline sat her horse, her posture suggesting experience beyond what he would expect from an Eastern schoolteacher. "My father kept horses," she explained when he commented. He believed every properly raised child should learn to ride, regardless of gender. Your father sounds like an unusual man. He was, she agreed, a shadow passing over her face. Too progressive for Baltimore society, too restless to stay in one place for long. We moved often when I was young. And your mother, the one with the, Samuel hesitated, the sight. Madeline's expression softened. She was Romany, what some call gypsy. My father scandalized his family by marrying her. She had a way of knowing things before they happened, small things usually, but sometimes, she glanced at him. Sometimes larger things. Samuel kept his skepticism to himself. He had seen enough of the world's genuine harshness to have little patience for superstition, but arguing would serve no purpose. Instead, he focused on their route, alert for any sign of trouble in the vast white landscape surrounding them. They made good time that first day, the horses moving steadily through packed snow under the winter sun. By late afternoon, Samuel began looking for a suitable campsite, eventually finding a sheltered hollow where rock outcroppings would break the wind and provide some protection. As he built their fire, Samuel was acutely aware of Madeline's presence. Her quiet competence as she arranged their bedrolls and prepared a simple meal, the grace of her movements, the way firelight caught copper highlights in her chestnut hair. It had been years since he had traveled with a woman and never one so refined yet practical. "You've done this before," he observed as she expertly prepared coffee in the battered pot he carried. "Camping," she smiled. "More times than I can count." Father believed in practical education. We spent summers exploring the wilds of Pennsylvania and New York. Another piece that didn't quite fit the picture of an Eastern schoolteacher. Samuel found himself increasingly curious about the complexities beneath her composed exterior. As night deepened around their small fire, the temperature dropped dramatically. Samuel added more wood, building the flames higher to combat the biting cold. "We should try to sleep," he said finally. "We have a long ride tomorrow." Madeline nodded but made no move toward her bedroll. Instead, she gazed into the fire, her expression distant. "Samuel," she said after a long silence, "may I ask why a man like you travels alone?" The question caught him off guard. "A man like me. Capable, intelligent, kind beneath that careful distance you maintain." Her eyes, when she looked up at him, reflected the firelight. "There's a story there." Samuel stared into the darkness beyond their camp. He never spoke of his past, not to trail bosses, not to the men he rode with, certainly not to strangers. Yet something about this woman and the vast, silent night around them loosened words he had kept locked away for years. "I had a family once," he said, his voice low. "A wife, a daughter, 5 years ago in Colorado." The words felt rusty, unused. "I was working a silver claim with 2 partners. Mary and Emma stayed in our cabin while I was at the mine." Madeline remained silent, waiting. There was a dispute over the claim. Another prospector believed we had jumped his stake. Samuel's hands tightened on his coffee cup. "He came to make his point while I was away, brought 2 friends. "Oh, Samuel," Madeline whispered. "By the time I returned, it was too late." The familiar hollowness spread through his chest. "I buried them on the mountainside. Then I buried the men responsible on unconsecrated ground where no one would ever find them." The admission hung in the cold air between them. Samuel had never told anyone about hunting down those men, about the cold rage that had driven him for months afterward. He waited for her shock, her judgment. Instead, Madeline moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his. "And you've been running ever since," she said softly, "not from what happened, but from the possibility of it happening again." Samuel looked at her sharply. "I'm not running, I'm being realistic. The frontier is no place for," he stopped himself. "For what? Love, family, the very things that make life worth the struggle." There was no accusation in her voice, only gentle questioning. "For vulnerability," he finished. "Out here, caring too much is a luxury that gets people killed." Madeline's hand found his in the darkness. "Or perhaps not caring at all is the greater danger, a slow death instead of a sudden one." Samuel couldn't answer. Her touch was warm against his cold fingers, and he found himself unable or unwilling to pull away. They sat in silence until the fire burned low, connected by that simple contact that somehow felt more intimate than anything he had experienced in years. The second day of travel brought new challenges. The temperature continued to drop, and by midday, Samuel was watching the sky with growing concern. Heavy clouds were building to the northwest, promising another storm. "We need to push harder," he told Madeline. "There's weather coming. I want to reach your uncle's place before it hits." They rode at a faster pace, the horses plowing through deeper snow as they climbed into higher country. By late afternoon, with the threatening sky darkening above them, Samuel spotted smoke rising from a valley ahead, a homestead tucked against the foothills, exactly where Madeline had described her uncle's place. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by an unexpected pang. Their journey was ending. Soon, Madeline would be with her family, and he would continue to the Crowley Ranch alone as he had always intended. As they approached the cabin, however, Samuel's instincts sharpened. Something wasn't right. The yard was unkempt, with drifted snow covering what appeared to be abandoned equipment. The smoke came from the chimney, but no other signs of life were visible. "Wait here," he told Madeline, drawing his revolver. "No," she said firmly. "If something's wrong with my uncle, I'm coming with you." Samuel wanted to argue but recognized the determination in her eyes. He nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind me." They approached the cabin cautiously. Samuel knocked, then called out, "Hello, the house, anyone home?" Silence, then a shuffling sound from within, followed by a weak voice. "Who's there?" "Henry Drake," Madeline called, pushing past Samuel. "Uncle Henry, it's Madeline." The door opened slowly, revealing a gaunt man with a gray-streaked beard and fever-bright eyes. He stared at them in confusion. "Madeline, my brother's girl." "Yes, Uncle Henry. I wrote that I was coming." She reached for him in concern. "You're ill." The man swayed on his feet. "Pneumonia, I think, been fighting it for weeks." Samuel moved quickly, supporting Henry's weight as the older man's knees buckled. Together, he and Madeline helped him back to the bed that occupied one corner of the single-room cabin. The interior of the homestead told a clear story. Henry Drake had been too sick to care for himself properly for some time. The cabin was cold despite the fire, dishes were piled unwashed, and medicinal supplies were scattered around the bed. "How long have you been like this?" Samuel asked, noting the man's labored breathing. "Lost track," Henry admitted weakly. "Started with a cough after Thanksgiving, kept getting worse." Madeline was already moving with purpose, stoking the fire and putting water on to boil. "We need to warm this place up," she said. "And make some broth if there's anything to cook with." Samuel nodded. "I'll take care of the horses, then see about firewood. You've got supplies outside, Drake, but they're buried in snow." The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. Samuel dug out Henry's woodpile, stabled their horses alongside the man's neglected mule, and found the root cellar where preserved vegetables and smoked meat were stored. Madeline, meanwhile, transformed the cabin's interior, cleaning, organizing medicines, and preparing food. By nightfall, Henry was resting more comfortably, the cabin was warm, and the threatening storm had arrived in full force, howling around the homestead with a vengeance that made Samuel grateful they had reached shelter in time. "You saved his life," Samuel told Madeline quietly as they sat at the rough-hewn table, sharing a simple stew. "He wouldn't have lasted another day alone." Madeline glanced at her sleeping uncle. "Perhaps that's what Mother meant. Not that I wouldn't make it to Christmas without you, but that he wouldn't." She looked back at Samuel. "Either way, you were meant to be here. We both were." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Coincidence, not destiny." "Is it?" She held his gaze. "Of all the saloons in all the towns in Montana Territory, you happened to be in the one where I collapsed. Of all the directions you could have been traveling, you were headed to a ranch near my uncle's homestead." "The world is full of such coincidences," Samuel insisted. "They mean nothing." "And yet here we are." Her smile was gentle. "You, who believes love is a dangerous luxury, me, who believes it's the only thing that gives meaning to all this struggle." She gestured around them. "Both exactly where we need to be, exactly when we need to be here." Samuel had no answer for her. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them together in this moment, in this place. Despite his determination to maintain distance, he found himself studying her face in the lamplight, the intelligence in her green eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the softness of her lips. "I should check on the horses," he said abruptly, standing. Madeline's knowing look followed him as he pulled on his coat and stepped into the storm. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Samuel and Madeline worked together to care for Henry, whose condition gradually improved under their attention. Samuel repaired neglected aspects of the homestead, mending the barn roof, chopping enormous quantities of firewood, caring for the animals. Madeline maintained the household and tended to her uncle with the skill of an experienced nurse. They moved around each other with an increasingly comfortable familiarity that both soothed and unsettled Samuel. At times, he would look up from his work to find Madeline watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Other times, he caught himself pausing in his chores just to observe her, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the gentle way she spoke to her uncle, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her slender frame. A week passed, then another. December deepened toward Christmas, and still Samuel remained at the Drake homestead. He told himself it was because Henry was still too weak to manage alone, that Madeline needed his help until her uncle recovered. He sent word to the Crowley ranch that he would be delayed indefinitely, but made no plans to leave. The truth, though he was reluctant to acknowledge it even to himself, was that he had found something at this isolated cabin that he had not experienced in years. A sense of purpose beyond mere survival. A connection to others that filled the hollow spaces inside him he had thought permanently empty. One evening, as December's early darkness settled over the mountains, Samuel returned from hunting to find the cabin transformed. Madeline had hung simple decorations, pine boughs and red berries gathered from the woods, paper stars she had crafted during quiet hours. A small, freshly cut pine tree stood in one corner, awaiting ornaments. "Christmas is coming," she explained when she saw his surprised expression. "Uncle Henry is feeling stronger and I thought it might lift his spirits." Samuel nodded, though the sight of the decorations stirred uncomfortable memories. The last Christmas he had celebrated had been with Mary and Emma in their little cabin in Colorado. Since then, he had deliberately worked through the holiday each year, taking the shifts other men wanted to spend with their families. That night, unable to sleep, Samuel sat by the dying fire while the others rested. The cabin was peaceful, with only the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional pop of burning wood breaking the silence. Outside, stars blazed in the clear, cold sky, a reminder of the vast indifference of the universe to human concerns. Yet inside this small shelter, something had been created that defied that indifference. A temporary family, perhaps. A connection that had changed the trajectory of at least 3 lives. Samuel thought of the man he had been just weeks ago, riding alone into Whitefish Creek. How certain he had been that solitude was the only safe choice, that caring for others was a vulnerability he could not afford. Now, watching Madeline's chest rise and fall in sleep, her chestnut hair spread across the pillow, he was no longer certain of anything. The following morning brought unexpected visitors. Samuel was repairing a broken sled runner when the sound of approaching horses caught his attention. He straightened, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip, and watched as 3 riders emerged from the tree line. 2 men and a woman, all bundled against the cold. As they drew closer, Samuel relaxed slightly. They appeared to be neighbors rather than trouble, though in this isolated country one could never be too careful. "Morning," called the lead rider, a bearded man of about 50, "you must be the help Henry's niece brought in." "Jim Calloway from over Painter Creek Way. This is my wife Sarah and our son Thomas." Samuel introduced himself, shaking hands with the visitors. "Henry's doing better," he added. "Still weak, but the fever's gone." "Glad to hear it," Jim said. "We were worried when he missed the Thanksgiving gathering at the Hansons. Would have come sooner, but we've had our own troubles with the weather." Madeline emerged from the cabin then, wearing a dark green dress that complemented her eyes, her hair neatly pinned up. She greeted the Calloways with such warmth that Samuel realized they must be close friends of her uncle. "We've come to invite you to Christmas dinner," Sarah Calloway explained. "The whole valley gathers at our place each year. It's 3 days away now." "That's very kind," Madeline said, glancing at Samuel, "but I'm not sure Uncle Henry is strong enough for such an outing." "Nonsense," came Henry's voice as he appeared in the doorway, leaning on a walking stick but standing straighter than Samuel had yet seen him. "I've never missed Jim's Christmas gathering, and I don't intend to start now." The visitors stayed for coffee, and Samuel observed the easy camaraderie between them and the Drakes. These people had built something rare on the frontier, not just individual homesteads, but a community that supported its members through the harsh realities of mountain life. After the Callaways departed with the promise that they would see everyone at Christmas dinner, Madeline found Samuel splitting wood behind the cabin. "You've gone quiet," she observed, watching him work. "Is something troubling you?" Samuel drove the axe into another log before answering. "I should be moving on soon. Henry's recovering." "You have neighbors to help if needed. Is that what you want to leave?" The directness of her question made him pause. "What I want has never mattered much," he said finally. "I make decisions based on what's necessary." "And is leaving necessary?" She stepped closer, her green eyes searching his face. "Or is it just safer than staying?" Samuel set down the axe, suddenly tired of the walls he had built around himself. "Madeline, I don't fit in your world. This community, these holiday gatherings, they're for people who believe in permanence, in putting down roots. And you don't believe in those things." She was close enough now that he could see the individual strands of gold in her chestnut hair. "Or are you afraid to try again?" "Both," he admitted, the word hung between them, his first truly honest answer. Madeline nodded slowly. "Then come to Christmas dinner before you decide. See what's possible before you ride away from it." Before Samuel could respond, she had turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving him with the scent of her hair in the cold air and an ache in his chest that no amount of physical labor could ease. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect winter clarity, brilliant sunshine sparkling off snow-covered mountains, the air so crisp it seemed to shatter with each breath. Samuel helped Henry into the repaired sleigh, tucking heavy buffalo robes around the older man to protect him from the cold during the hour-long journey to the Callaway Ranch. Madeline emerged from the cabin wearing her best dress, a deep blue wool that set off her fair skin, and a fur-lined cloak Samuel had found among her uncle's stored possessions, apparently left behind by his late wife. She looked beautiful and somehow vulnerable, her cheeks flushed with cold and anticipation. "Ready?" she asked, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Samuel nodded, lifting her into the sleigh beside her uncle before taking the reins. As they glided over the snow-packed trail, he was acutely aware of her presence beside him, of the temporary nature of this moment. Tomorrow, Christmas Day, he would announce his intention to leave for the Crowley Ranch. His extended stay had already defied all his careful rules for survival. The Callaway Ranch was ablaze with light and activity when they arrived. Lanterns hung from porch posts and the windows glowed golden against the gathering dusk. At least a dozen horses and several sleighs were already tied up outside the large log house. Inside was a scene unlike anything Samuel had experienced since leaving his family home in Pennsylvania as a young man. The main room of the Callaway house had been transformed for the holiday, with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles creating a festive atmosphere. At least 30 people filled the space, men, women, and children representing every homestead within 20 miles. Henry was immediately surrounded by friends, his improved health the subject of much celebration. Madeline moved through the crowd with natural grace, already known to many through her uncle's stories. Samuel found himself retreating to a quiet corner, overwhelmed by the unaccustomed socializing. First time at one of these gatherings, a gray-haired man with a friendly face joined Samuel in his corner. "That obvious?" Samuel asked wryly. The man chuckled. "You have the look of a man planning his escape route. I'm Dr. William Thomas. Most folks around here call me Doc Will." "Samuel Zane." They shook hands. "You're the local physician." "Such as it is, territory this size, I'm more often treating horses than people." Doc Will studied him with shrewd eyes. "Henry says you saved his life, his and his niece's." Samuel shook his head. "They would have managed." "Not according to them," the doctor smiled. "Funny how life works, isn't it? You ride into the middle of nowhere and end up exactly where you're needed most." Before Samuel could respond, Madeline appeared at his side, her face flushed with happiness. "Samuel, they're about to start the music. Will you join the dancing?" "I don't dance," he said automatically. Her smile didn't falter. "Everyone dances at Christmas, even reluctant cowboys." She took his hand and despite himself, Samuel allowed her to lead him toward the center of the room where space had been cleared. The music began: fiddles, a guitar, and someone playing a mouth organ. The tune was lively, a reel that had couples forming lines facing each other. Samuel found himself partnered with Madeline, her eyes bright with challenge as they began the simple steps. "Just follow the others," she whispered, her hand warm in his. Surprisingly, the movements came back to him, memories of similar dances in his youth, before the war, before the mining camps, before all the loss that had shaped his adult life. He was by no means graceful, but he managed to avoid stepping on Madeline's toes, and by the third dance he found himself actually enjoying the experience. The evening progressed with food, more dancing, and eventually caroling around the large Christmas tree in the corner. Samuel remained at Madeline's side throughout, increasingly aware that tomorrow he would have to tear himself away from this unexpected happiness. Late in the evening, as the gathering began to wind down, Madeline led him outside onto the porch. The night was perfectly still, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Samuel looked down at her upturned face, so trusting, so open to whatever might come. "That I haven't celebrated Christmas in 5 years, that I didn't expect to enjoy it when I did. And that leaving tomorrow will be harder than I anticipated." Madeline's expression grew serious. "Then don't leave. Madeline, listen to me, Samuel." She placed her hand on his chest over his heart. "I know you believe caring for others makes you vulnerable, that love is a luxury you can't afford, but what if the opposite is true? What if connection is exactly what makes survival on the frontier possible?" Samuel covered her hand with his own, feeling the warmth of her even through his shirt. "What are you suggesting?" "Stay," she said simply. "Not just for Christmas, stay for the winter, for the spring planting. Stay and see if what's growing between us is strong enough to heal what's broken in both of us." "Both of us?" he questioned. Madeline smiled sadly. "You think you're the only one carrying wounds. I watched my mother die slowly, then my father follow her from grief. I came west because there was nothing left for me in Baltimore but memories and pity." She stepped closer. "I understand loss, Samuel. I understand the temptation to close yourself off from the possibility of more pain, but I also know that's not really living." Samuel couldn't find words to answer her. Instead, he did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with increasing urgency as she responded. Her lips were soft beneath his, her body warm against the cold night air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the words barely audible. "I know," she whispered. "So am I, but we can be afraid together. That's better than being afraid alone." Inside, the gathering was breaking up, with families bundling children into sleighs and wagons for the journey home. Samuel and Madeline returned to find Henry ready to depart, his eyes knowing as he observed their flushed faces and clasped hands. The ride back to the Drake homestead was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts beneath the brilliant stars. Samuel felt as though he stood at a crossroads, one path leading back to the solitary existence he had known, the other toward an uncertain future with this remarkable woman. As they approached the cabin, the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky, Christmas morning breaking over the Montana wilderness. Samuel helped Henry inside, then returned to care for the horses while Madeline lit the lamps and stoked the fire. When he entered the cabin, she was waiting for him, a small package in her hands. "Merry Christmas, Samuel." He took the carefully wrapped bundle, surprised and slightly embarrassed. "I have nothing for you." "Open it," she urged. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and promising. "I noticed you watching the stars at night," Madeline explained. "My father always said a man who studies the sky has thoughts that deserve recording." Samuel ran his fingers over the smooth cover. It was a thoughtful gift, one that acknowledged depths in him that few had ever noticed. "Thank you," he said simply. Henry cleared his throat from his chair by the fire. "If you two are done with the gift-giving, I have an announcement." When they turned to him, he continued, "I've been thinking about my future. This pneumonia was a warning. I'm not getting any younger, and this homestead is too much for one man alone." Samuel tensed, sensing what might be coming. "I received a letter last month from an old army friend in California," Henry went on. "He's opened a small practice there, milder climate, easier work. He's invited me to join him." He looked directly at Samuel. "This place needs younger hands, someone with strength and skills to develop it properly." "Uncle Henry," Madeline began, "are you saying you want to sell the homestead?" "Not sell. Pass on." Henry's eyes remained on Samuel. "To family." The implications hung in the air between them. Samuel felt the weight of the moment, the offer being made, the future it represented, a home. "Roots, commitment, sir," he said carefully. "I'm honored by your suggestion, but—" "But nothing," Henry interrupted. "I've watched you these past weeks. You know ranching, you work harder than men half your age, and most importantly, you look at my niece the way a man should look at the woman he intends to marry." Samuel glanced at Madeline, whose face revealed nothing except a quiet waiting. This was his decision to make, his fear to overcome. "I had a family once," he said slowly. "I lost them. I'm not sure I have the courage to risk that again." "Courage isn't about not being afraid," Henry said. "It's about being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Outside, the Christmas dawn was spreading golden light across the snow-covered valley, a new day, a new beginning. Samuel looked at Madeline, seeing in her green eyes all the possibilities of the future. Shared work, shared laughter, children with her chestnut hair and his blue eyes, years of building something meaningful together. "Stay," she said again, so softly only he could hear. "Choose life instead of just survival." In that moment, Samuel felt the walls he had built around his heart over 5 long years begin to crumble. The memories of Mary and Emma would always be with him, but perhaps they could exist alongside new joy, new love. Perhaps the greatest tribute to what he had lost was to find the courage to love again. "Yes," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "I'll stay." The smile that broke across Madeline's face was like sunshine after the darkest storm. She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "She whispered I was not meant to make it to Christmas," she said softly, and the cowboy lifted her up. Samuel pulled her into his arms, understanding at last. Perhaps there was something to her mother's sight after all. For he had indeed lifted Madeline from the saloon floor that snowy night, but she in turn had lifted him from a much darker place, the half-life he had been living since burying his family on that Colorado mountainside. "Merry Christmas," he whispered against her hair. Outside, the sun cleared the eastern mountains, bathing the Drake homestead in brilliant light. A new day, a new year soon to come. A new life waiting to be built by hands no longer afraid to reach for happiness. As Samuel held Madeline in the golden Christmas morning light, he understood finally that the frontier's harshness demanded not isolation but connection. Not walls but bridges. Not solitude but love strong enough to face whatever challenges might come. Together they would build that love day by day, season by season, until the wounds of the past were healed by the promise of their shared future.